both these big deer up here above the fireplace. Killed both of them on rub lines in November. They go through those areas and make a rub line. And what I call a rub line, if I find 10 or 12 trees that's all rubbed down, say I'm hunting the first week of November with my bow, and I find rub lines along a ridge or the head of a drainage like that, and there's rubs on that corridor through there, but I don't see any older rubs, then I don't think that much about it. But if I see a rub line and then I see rubs like last year's rubs in that same place, that's barked over, but you can still tell they're a rub, you know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Or you see rubs that were made in late September, and then you see rubs that were made mid-October, there's dried up a little bit, and then you see these fresh rubs there. That's telling me there's 1, 2, or 3 bucks, or there's one deer traveling this a whole lot.
Well, Mo Shepherd, I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm glad you guys came to visit with me.
Yeah, glad to be here. It's always hard finding new people, especially we live like 8 hours from here. And it's always hard finding people that far from the house. And I was like, well, I'll text Clay. And so I texted Clay Newcomb. And I was like, hey, do you know anybody up around you who's just really good public land hunter, total woodsman, just the real deal? And he immediately texted back and said, Mo Shepherd. And I was like, all right. And then he hooked me up with you. And man, I appreciate you doing this with us.
Well, I appreciate it. And like I said, I don't know why he'd want to fib to you so much, Clay did, but me and Clay's been friends for several years now, and we've hunted together and stuff. So he knows me pretty good on how I hunt and stuff. So
yeah.
Yeah, well, we're excited to be here. Mo, we were talking about this a little bit beforehand, but you have a lot of family history in the state of Arkansas, and I want to talk about that and your upbringing.
Yes.
What is first off, your family history in the state of Arkansas? How long have y'all been here? But also, how were you raised in the outdoors as a young kid?
Okay. Well, the Shepherd family settled here between probably 1830 and 1850. And there was 2 brothers. One of them was my great-great-grandfather, and they came up rafts from Alabama. Is where they originated from, and they came up rafts up the Mississippi River, and then come up the Arkansas River. Then they hit Frog Bayou, which right now we're within. You all crossed it coming over here to my house, and it runs way on into the mountains up back east and north of here, where it heads up in the mountains up there, which is a place called Shepherd Mountain, a.k.a. where I grew up. So I'm not living where I grew up, but I'm close still, within 30, 40 minutes of where I grew up from here. So that's where it all got started. And then my great-grandfather lived in the mountains here. My grandpa lived there. My dad lived in these mountains. And now I'm living here. So that's however many generations, I guess 5 generations. So have lived in this part of the state here in northwest Arkansas, and I started hunting when I was pretty young. There wasn't a lot of deer when I was growing up, but there was a few, and it's kind of funny. Like I was born in 1960, so I didn't really get to hunt till probably close to 70. I was probably 9 or 10 the first time I got to really deer hunt with my dad. And if somebody killed a deer, even if it was a spike, you wanted to go see it. Because not many deer were killed. I mean, we'd leave the farm up there and go down to the neighbors if they'd killed a spike or whatever, and just to see their deer, And it's pretty wild compared to what it is now. On public land, there's still not deer like there is on private lands. I mean, the private lands holds the deer, compared to the open terrain of the wild mountains and stuff. For one reason, my opinion is because private land, you can regulate how many hunters go on it. Public land, you don't regulate. You just have it open, pretty much, and it gets a lot more pressure. But that makes hunting more challenging to me. I love hunting public land in these mountains up here. But anyway, starting on it, like I said, that's I started with just squirrel hunting with my dad, and then when I was about 10 or 11, I got to go on my first deer hunt. I didn't kill a deer. My dad killed one that year, and which was pretty wild because, like I said, there wasn't a lot of deer back then. But I still remember those days, and that was. I'm 64 now, so that was, 52, 53, 54 years ago when that happened. But I can still remember it just like it was today.
Back then, outside of your father, did you know anybody else that deer hunted back then when you were growing up?
Yeah, there was some people my dad's age or my mom's age, that most of them are gone now or passed away, but they hunted and kind of an old martyr guy I remember so much, and was named Ora Province, and I remember back it was the late 60s. I'm pretty sure that's when it was, in the late 60s. I was just a kid, either that or early 70s. He killed 2 humongous bucks up on public land up in those mountains up toward Shepherd Mountain where I grew up and where my ancestry came from. Like by today's standards, like one of them scored 170 something other, another one scored 180 something other. And that's pretty wild for back then. And he killed them the same year. And I remember my dad taking me down there and looking at them. He had them, when he killed them apart from each other, a couple of days apart, 2 or 3 days apart. But I still remember those deer just being humongous, and that kind of set the tone on me for wanting to hunt deer then. I just couldn't believe they were that big, because most all I'd ever seen was little forked horns or 6 points or spikes. Once in a while you'd see a nice little 8 point, but somebody'd get. But he hunted, and then most of my dad's brothers, like I said, my dad had 4 brothers that lived up in those mountains too. They're all passed away and gone now, but they hunted too and stuff, and so that's kind of the background of where I got my desire to want to hunt. Was hunting with my dad, and then my uncles and stuff hunting up there, and like Mr. Province hunting down there. So
now back then, was it most guys just still hunting, or were there dog hunters back then? Kind of what was the style?
There was a few dog hunters when I was a kid, but most of the people, my dad and his brothers and them, and like Mr. Ori Province, most of them do what I call it this. A lot of people call it still hunting. I call it slip hunting, where you just ease along and get to a place where you can see, or ease around the top of a bluff line where you can watch down on the hillsides below it. And you get a spot you like. You may sit there 5 minutes. You may sit there 5 hours once you sit down. Or you may sit there 5 minutes and go another 100 yards, sit down again for 5 minutes. But that's how most people hunted back then. Other than, like I said, there was a few people would run beagle dogs a little bit, and but not very many back then. So in the mountains up there, most of it was slip hunting. There wasn't such a thing as a stand. Nobody knew what a stand was when I was a kid growing up. When I got a little bit older, then I heard people talking about it. Getting, and them first old tree stands I made were death traps.
The old Baker special.
Old Bakers and different ones. They just the first tree hunting I ever done was I would just climb a tree and sit on a limb or something other. And the first deer I ever shot at with my recurve bow, I was standing on a big white oak limb. Didn't get it, missed it, but that taught me something. Then I thought that deer never sent him in, come right by me. And I was like 17 or 18 then when I shot my first deer with a recurve bow. So,
do you remember the first nice racked buck that you saw while hunting in the woods? Because you were saying you saw a lot of spikes and 4 points. You remember the first, sure enough, good buck that you saw?
That I saw?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do.
What's the story on that?
Well, me and my dad were going into a place to hunt, and we were going down an old ridge line, walking in there, and he was going to let me sit for a little while, and he was going to go down and hunt, slip on down, and he was going to come back up the other side of the ridge, thinking he might push something across me. And before we even got to where we was going to go, we saw some movement, and a nice buck. For back then, it was an 8 point. It was a nice deer. It and a doe jumped out of their bed and took off running, down the hillside. I don't know. I was probably 15 or 16, something like that. And I just remember he raised up. I didn't even know what to do. And he raised up and shot 3 times. He was hunting with a Winchester lever action 30-30. And he shot 3 times. And I remember telling him, I said, "Man, did you get it?" He said, "Well, I don't know." He said, "But I'm pretty sure I had my sights on it." We waited a little while and went over there and found a little bit of blood, and it only went about 100 yards. It was a nice little 8-point buck, and you could have covered all 3 shots with your hand where he'd hit it. I mean, it wasn't running. They jumped up and just kind of trotted off. But my dad was a really good shot. He hunted for years. I'd go squirrel hunting with him, and he had an old single shot 22, and he'd pop them squirrels in the head with them open sights and stuff. So, but that's the first deer of any size I remember. Like I said, I wasn't that old then, but.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the things that you learned from maybe your dad, some of those other guys about hunting in the mountains? Just early on fundamentals that you learned from them.
Well, like I said, the way everybody hunted back then is cover some country. Whether you're looking for something to hunt or trying to find a place to hunt, don't get back then, and I still do it some today. I don't get stuck in a rut just going to one place because I find sign there. If I find sign and go to a place, and I get that from my dad and my uncles and stuff, and Mr. Province, Mr. Roy Province, is just find a good place and hunt it, but don't overhunt it. Go somewhere else, and then if you don't have luck somewhere else, go back to that another day and go in there and hunt, slip through it, or sit and watch and do stuff. And that's probably what I learned early on from that. But there wasn't that many deer then. There's a lot more deer now compared to then. So it's a little easier to find a spot and set on it, and go back to it a few days and hunt. But back then, the deer were so sparse, even though you found good sign, that deer might not come through there but once every 10 days, And back then, growing up on the farm and working on the farm and stuff, you didn't have 10 days to hunt. You had chickens to take care of. We had beef cattle. We had hogs. Everything took care of on the farm. So big difference then. So
that's cool.
But I still apply those tactics today when I do what I call slip hunting.
And we're going to talk more about slip hunting because I'm really interested in that, because I think I've heard you talk about that with Clay before, and some of those bluff rock line, bluff walls, kind of slipping on those as well. But before, at what point, how old do you think you were when you started taking deer hunting more seriously, both archery but also throughout all the different seasons, muzzleloader and rifle season y'all have here in Arkansas?
Probably when I got moved out on my own. I moved off the farm and went to Votech school, and was on my own there, for a couple of years. And my dad helped me buy an old Ford Bronco, a '76 Ford Bronco, so I could take that thing wherever I needed to, off in the, as I called it, the sticks back then, and then walk from there, and I could get in some pretty remote country. And I'd killed 2 or 3 deer up to that point, but I remember when I was 19, I took my old Bronco off into a place in a big old canyon and parked it as far as I could go in there, and waded across the creek and went up the mountainside where my dad told me to go. And I'd actually hunted with him before in there. And that day I killed 2 8-point bucks, and I was 20-year-old. And I think that time right there set my roots for how hard I wanted to hunt public land.
That's cool. That's awesome.
Well, and also we see some commonality between guests when we talk about if they grew up hunting with a family member, like say a father and uncle, when they kind of went out on their own, you learn some core woodsmanship skills and hunting skills from, whoever that mentor was, but it's not until really you take it to apply it on your own, you fail a whole bunch of when you start building more confidence in what's kind of working and become a little bit more successful. Do you remember some early on hunting the mountains when you were, say, maybe in your early 20s, of some of those failures you might have had or dumb mistakes you would make, but then you kind of learn from that to, maybe be a little more successful? What were some of those mistakes you made back then?
The deal I was just telling you about where I killed those 2 bucks is I used to, back then, you didn't have stuff like that. Now, you didn't have YouTube. You didn't have, all you had was books to read, pretty much. There wasn't any shows to watch or anything when I was 18, 19, 20-year-old. But I would find, my dad had showed me when I was growing up, he said, this is scrapes. This is where they've made some scrapes and stuff. And he said, sometimes they'll come back to them, sometimes they don't. They may come of a night when you're never going to be here to see them anyway. But those intrigued me, and so I started hunting them, but I hunted them wrong. I didn't take into effect the thermals, anything like that. And I sat on some big sign back then, which I think would have been big deer for back then especially. Never saw them and couldn't figure out, and I kind of got frustrated. And then that year like I said, I think it was I think it was 79. Yeah, it was 79 because I was 19. I found a place like that, and that's where I took my Bronco. I walked up into that spot, and it was luck that made it happen. But you know how thermals work. You know, as the sun rises, they change from going down to coming up. I got up on the hillside above where I could see this scrape line in an old logging road, and I don't know, it was probably, I'd been there an hour and a half or so, and seen a doe coming, and this buck was trailing her. And they stopped down there, and I made a good shot at him. He ran this little ways and fell. Oh, I was so excited because I could tell he was a nice deer. He's the biggest one I'd killed so far. I mean, he was an 8-point, but he was a pretty nice deer. I've still got the horns here somewhere, but yeah, for both of them. But I got up when I see he wasn't moving, walked down there to him, and looked at it and everything. And I remember my dad telling me, he said, you know, if you kill one, you need to get it gutted pretty fast. But if you're hunting around a scrape or something other, he said, move it away from it a little bit so you don't leave all the blood and stuff there, is what he had told me. So I drug it back up the hill a little ways and finished getting it gutted and was just fixing to take off, and I heard a commotion. I looked around the hillside, and here come another 8-point on that same doe's trail. And come around through there, and long story short, I shot and killed him, so I had 2 8-points down up on the side of that mountain there and when I was 19. But that taught me a lot about hunting scrapes. If I'd been below that or around the hill from it, I'd probably never seen either one of those deer, whether they'd have paid attention to him. But if the doe had smelt me, she'd have turned and probably went a different direction, and I would have never got either one of them. But that's something I learned early right there, was about thermals, because my dad, I guess, didn't understand them either. You know, he never told me that, other than he just told me, if you kill one around a scrape, get it away from there before you field dress it and stuff. So
Now,
that answer your question?
oh yeah, no, absolutely. And I've got some follow up on that, but is scrape still something you put a lot of importance on in the mountains?
I put importance on them knowing there's deer there. I don't hunt them as hard as I used to when I was younger. I hunt more in the mountains now. I hunt more pinch points, rub lines. I understand those better now. You know, you do when you get older. And if you've got scrapes and rub lines combined, then yes. If you've just got scrapes and not many rubs, I don't hunt them much. I like the combination of both, or I'll hunt rub lines over a scrape line. And especially if it's like the head of a canyon, where benches come in and narrow down. And believe it or not, big bucks don't like to do this. They'd rather travel this way. But you have to really use the thermals in when you're in the head of those hollers and stuff, because they will smell you. You'll never see them. So
I want to talk about those terrain features, but we gotta talk about rubs for a minute, because we were talking earlier, we've been doing the podcast for 8 years. We're probably in the 700s of episodes by now. And rubs are not, like, we just haven't found a lot of guys that hunt rubs, like what you're talking
Rub
about.
lines.
Rub lines.
rub lines.
So explain what a rub line is and your thoughts around it and how you hunt them.
Well, what I consider a rub line is, and in my opinion, what I've watched deer do and what I find sign when you can see their tracks and stuff, I think deer do a lot of the rubbing when they first get up out of their beds and they're traveling to their areas, whether they're going to be looking for does, they're wanting to make scrapes, whatever, where they think theirs are passing. But I think they go through those areas and make a rub line. And what I call a rub line, if I find 10 or 12 trees that's all rubbed down, say I'm hunting the first week of November with my bow, and I find rub lines along a ridge or the head of a drainage like that, and there's rub lines. I mean, there's rubs on that corridor through there, but I don't see any older rubs, then I don't think that much about it. But if I see a rub line and then I see rubs like last year's rubs in that same place, that's barked over, but you can still tell they're a rub, you know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Or you see rubs that were made in late September, and then you see rubs that were made mid-October, there's dried up a little bit, and then you see these fresh rubs there. That's telling me there's 1, 2, or 3 bucks, or there's one deer traveling this a whole lot. And I think I don't think they go out of their way to rub a tree unless they really get fired up and work one over. Whatever side that rub is mostly worked on, I believe that's the way the deer is traveling at that time of day. And you can do that, and a lot of times it'll tell you if they're leaving their bed in the area or what they're doing. And I've hunted that a lot, and I've had a lot of success doing that. Both these big deer up here above the fireplace, killed both of them on rub lines in November.
So you want a history of rubs, and then also just reading the rubs. Like, are you always looking for a certain size of rub, or does that matter?
No, it don't mean a lot to me, other than when I find one bigger than my leg, then I get excited. You know, even big bucks will rub little trees. Big bucks will rub big trees. Little bucks, I think, will rub some on bigger trees. But when you find 2 or 3 large rubs in a place like where I'm talking about, where there's older rubs and stuff, that tells me that that's, I think, a lot bigger mature, you know, in that over 3.5-year-old deer make those bigger rubs like that. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but there's a backpack frame mount right here sitting behind me. I hunted that area for 3 years. First year I hunted it, I was just slip hunting. I'd hunted years before in there, but I hadn't been in there in several years. But I remembered when I was in there before hunting it, and then I think it was a year or 2 before I started hunting after this buck, I was in there turkey hunting and found some big rubs in there that was made, you know, that was, you know, baseball size, bat size rubs. And so I decided to go in there that fall. I hunted that fall, but I didn't really understand it because they was a rub line, but it wasn't a lot. But they were all big rubs, the ones I was finding, and I could tell. And I went back the next year, and they were in the same area, new rubs. And then the third year, when I killed this deer, I was in their muzzleloader season, the end of October, and found 2 or 3 fresh rubs that were big, like I said, the size of my leg on some maple trees and stuff. And I said, this is a big deer. It's the same deer. I think it's been here for 3 years. And I hunted in there a couple of days, but the wind had to be right because I was hunting a gap in a bluff on the side of a ridge that come up. There's some really thick, steep terrain above and below. But there's a flat there that does like to bed on. And up on that flat, there is some scrapes. But I didn't sit where the scrapes was. I found a gap in this bluff. You know, the gap is 150 yards wide, but there's a big bluff goes one way from it, another bluff goes the other way. And if they want to come up there, they either go way around the end that way, or they come up through that gap. And the second day I sat there, I got there and got up in my tree stand, and I almost give up. I almost thought, man, I've sat here all day, but I told my wife that day, I said, I may stay in here all day today. You know, I said, because it's a good day. It's cold. It's 2 days before Thanksgiving. I'm going to stick with it. And at 11:45, heard a stick break and looked, and this big deer comes up through that bluff gap and with his nose to the ground. And I know there wasn't a doe come through there because I'd been there, but he was looking for a doe. And when he gave me a shot, I took it and took him. He's almost 22 inches wide, so big mountain buck.
There's more of you guys getting into saddle hunting than ever before, and a common question we always get is, how do you get comfortable in a saddle? Because there's so many moving parts. And today I'm gonna give you 3 of the best tips that I have for getting comfortable in the saddle after doing this for about 8.5 years. Number 1 is tether height. Setting your tether at the right height is gonna give you extreme comfort, but this is one big reason why you need to practice with it. I like mine right at nose level when I'm standing on the platform. The other is your bridge length. Having an adjustable bridge on your saddle makes it extremely comfortable to fine tune that comfort, and I like mine extended out almost all the way. The third is how you sit in your saddle. Some people like the saddle sitting just below the belt line, which I've done in some saddles in the past. That made it more comfortable. Some are right at the belt line, and some are a little bit above the belt line. Now, having a very comfortable saddle makes it really easy to do all this stuff with less adjustment. And the Lone Star saddle from Latitude Outdoors is that saddle for me personally. I really like this saddle, and I really like the hip pinch reduction system that's built into the saddle that gives me a lot more comfort all day long with less adjustments needed. If you want to check out the Lone Star saddle from Latitude Outdoors, you can go to latitudeoutdoors.com for more information.
You know, more big bucks probably get killed on clear cuts than anything else, especially when it comes to hunting in the southeast. And back behind me, I've got a really good example of what makes a good spot in a clear cut. So there's two main ingredients you want to look for. You want to look for low spots and you want to look for habitat diversity. Right here behind me, I've got both of those. We've got this more fresh cut. It's just got some grasses and some saplings in it, but enough that a deer's probably going to feel hidden in it. They're going to want to be in it. And then this hill rolls off, and back behind me over here, we've got a pine thicket. And right there in that lowest spot, this clear cut meets that pine thicket, which is perfect. So I've got my two key ingredients meeting right in the same spot. That's how I can look at this clear cut that's over 100 acres, and I can narrow it down to the spot within the spot. Now, one challenging thing about hunting these spots that you got to watch out for is you could have a deer pop out at 50 yards, but you could also have one pop out at 450. For that reason, I like carrying a pair of range finding binoculars. These are the brand new Ranger 3000s from Vortex. They've got great glass. They've got a great price point. They're thin and they're lightweight. They fit my bino harness just perfect. The reason I like carrying a pair of range finding binoculars is so I don't have to fumble with two separate objects, like get my binos up, see it's a shooter, and then try to get the rangefinder out. I can do all that at the same time with these, which is going to save me valuable seconds. And if you've hunted something like this, you know that a few seconds can literally completely make or break your hunt. So if you want to check out the Ranger HD 3000s from Vortex, go to eurooptic.com, use the promo code Southern10. It's going to get you a discount on these binoculars or any other optics from Vortex. So y'all go to eurooptic.com, use that code Southern10. It's going to get you a discount on any Vortex products. One thing we talk about with almost every guest on this show is map scouting. My favorite map scouting tool is LiDAR. If you're unfamiliar, LiDAR is basically like a 3D scan of the Earth's surface. I like to say it kind of takes away all the surprises. LiDAR is now available on onX Hunt on their topography map. If you go to your app right now, click on the topography map, you can flip on that LiDAR feature and boom, it's going to come on and you're going to see what I'm talking about. The LiDAR is going to allow you to see things that are normally hidden from view. This might be ditches, bends in creeks, rocks, old road beds. I personally love old road beds because deer like to walk them. They're great places to find scrapes. They're great camera locations. And you know, before, an old road bed or an old logging road might be something that you kind of happen upon while you're out scouting or hunting. Well, now with the LiDAR, before I go into an area, I can turn on that LiDAR and I can see exactly where those road beds are. Even old logging roads from the 1930s, you can still see them on there. So that allows me to go straight to those spots and check them out. It's just an incredibly helpful tool, and it's available now on onX Hunt. And hey, if you want to get 20% off your onX Elite membership, you can use the promo code Southern. Like I said, it's going to save you 20%. Go check out that LiDAR feature. You'll be glad you did. Know where you stand with onX Hunt.
Over the years, we've interviewed quite a few successful ground hunters when it comes to bow hunting, and the commonalities between all of them is using the shadows to their advantage. Having overhead cover, back cover, and a little bit of front cover that adds a little bit more shadows to their setup, which allows them to hide a lot easier. That's what we've done today and built this brush blind for Andrew to come in here with his recurve and shoot some does, hopefully early season when these white oaks behind the camera are going to be dropping. One important thing about blending in the shadows is having something that works camo wise in the shadows, and that's one thing I like about this Mossy Oak Woodsman Leaf Jacket is it's a little bit darker in color, and to me blends in a little bit better to the shadows during early season when you have full leaves on those trees. This is something I'm going to keep in my backpack all season because it's really compact, it's really lightweight, and breathes really well, and I really won't need it until I need it, but it's going to be in my backpack the whole time, which is really nice because of how compact it is. So if you're interested in ground hunting a little bit this year or having extra concealment up in the tree, check out the Mossy Oak Woodsman Leaf Jacket at mossyoak.com.
Yeah, he's got all kinds of little points around right at his base.
He got 12 total points. So.
I was looking at him. I was like, man, I bet he would shred a tree.
Yeah.
with those
like
points.
I said, I've got a couple of pictures of some of the rubs I took in there. Like I said, there's some that are that big around that he had just shredded up about that high. Or I figures him, could have been another deer. Mm-hmm. That's what you never know when you kill a big deer, especially on public land. You may think you killed a big one, but he may not have been the biggest one in there, or maybe another one just like him in there. So
staying on the topic of rubs and rub lines, I find this topic super interesting just because one thing I love about deer hunting and doing these episodes is we can talk to somebody who would say, absolutely never hunt rub lines, you're not going to have success. And we have guys
I've got friends that tell me that.
Well, that's what I love about deer hunting. There's so many different ways to be successful, building confidence in what works in your area. And again, I think you're one of the first guys we've talked to that I recall after a bunch of episodes that hunts rub line successfully. Do you pay attention at all to height of tine marks on rubs? Like, is that anything that kind of keys you on thinking it's a deer that has, longer tines or anything like
These two
that?
deer up here,
Uh-huh.
I told you I killed both of them on rub lines in steep terrain. They got 12-inch plus tines. The rubs I found in there weren't very big. The biggest rubs I found were probably small baseball size on some maples and stuff. But where the main rub was, there was gouges up, quite a bit above where the main rub was, where you can see the ends of the tines where I guess where had been rubbing their dadgum head and scrubbing, where those tall tines had gouged and knocked bark loose and skint limbs coming off of those trees. And yes, I pay attention to that.
Okay.
Woodsmanship.
Yeah. Now,
Woodsmanship.
also with rub lines and hunting rub lines, is there a time of do you like hunting rub lines both morning and evening? Is it more of a morning spot or more of an evening spot? What's your thoughts on that?
That goes back to what the other question you asked me
Mm-hmm.
on. If you study the rub lines, you can almost tell if it's when a buck is coming from his bedding or heading back to his bedding, because they don't usually use the same path. I think they use a different path, and they don't necessarily use the same path for days in a row. I think they may use a path here and leave their bedding area, and in the mountains they may have 6 or 8 bedding areas because they cover so much terrain looking for does. But you can still find those spots. And to answer your question, same way, if you're in a place where does bed, or where you're finding scrapes and stuff, or feeding areas where there's a lot of mast on some little benches or on a ridge line or something other, and you find rubs heading into bluffy area or into a thick growed up edge of an old clear cut or something other, that's telling you it's more likely he's bedding area. If you see rubs going into that bedding area, then what does that tell you?
You need to be there in the morning.
Yes. And if you see those coming from, like I told you earlier, then you need to be in that. But if you find rub lines on like that bluff line I told you, any time of the day is good there, because they may bed right under that bluff, so they may be passing through that gap one way or the other, or they may come through at 11:45 during the middle of the day. I think what a lot of big bucks do in the mountains too is, I think a lot of times they prowl all night long. And there's certain days they will not get out of that bed, I think, all day long. An old mature buck, he'll lay there bedded up all day long. And then there's certain times, though, and one of my favorite times is that week of Thanksgiving. I think they prowl all night, they go bed a little while, and then they get back on their feet 10 or 11 o'clock during the day. I've killed several bucks in that 10 to 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon time frame, hunting rub lines or places, pinch points like that bluff line was. It was a combo. It was a rub line and a pinch point combined. So
The pinch point being the bluff gap and a bench, or is it just?
well, you
bluff
had I'm saying the pinch point was just that bluff line.
Mm-hmm.
There's 10 benches between there and the creek, and there's 10 benches between where I was sitting at and the top of the mountain. So they could travel all day on them benches, on any bench, and you might sit there for a week and never see one. But if they want to go up and down that hill in that certain area, then that bluff gap is a good spot.
And every time we talk about bluff gaps, we get questions about them. Can you just explain what a bluff gap is?
Well, bluffs are not impassable by deer unless they're a sheer 50-foot rock bluff. But bucks are lazy, in my opinion. They like to travel where it's elite. Like I said a minute ago, they like to go to the head of a holler and cross instead of going across a steep place. Even if it's not sheer bluff, it's still rocky and hard for them to maneuver through. So gap in a bluff, in my opinion, is where there's a really steep rocky area, or it can be a bluff, and then there's an open spot there. And usually you'll find a pretty good trail on those places. But a lot of times, if you find another bluff gap that there ain't much of a trail, but you find some rubs on it, all the does travel through that bigger gap. And if you find a smaller gap or a place that's more secluded or more close to a bedding area, and you just see a little dim trail or a few tracks and some rubs there, that's the one I'm going to hunt. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. So you're hunting that little subtle trail rather
Yes.
than the big heavy
The big
one.
heavy trail.
If the rubs tell you to.
Yeah, if
Right.
the rubs tell me to do that. If there's rubs above or below that gap in that bluff. But to me, a bluff gap can be a big one or it can be a little one. I've bow hunted on bluff gaps that wasn't no wider from here to the back door.
Okay. Man, I love this conversation.
Yeah. So staying on the rub line aspect, of course, everybody's seen rub line. If you deer hunt for any amount of time, you found rubs and rub lines. How do you dictate certain rub lines that you put more value in from, like, I think I could kill a buck here versus another one?
Well, you got to take into effect your dominant winds, your prevailing winds, whatever you want to call it. You have to take that in effect because you can have a rub line there that's just wore out. But if there's no way you can hunt it without your scent going to where it don't need to go, you're just wasting your time, in my opinion. Even a buck that's chasing a doe, I've heard stories. I've even seen it myself where I know they've smelt me and didn't pay much attention. They stayed on a doe's trail. But there's other times that I think they smell or see something out of whack and they're done. So as far as I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's hard to describe that on exactly how to pinpoint that other than just it's guesswork too. You just have to assume or think this is maybe the better spot because I can sit here, I can watch this, and as long as the wind's right when I go there, I'm good. But even though it's tore up with sign, if the wind's not right, you better not hunt it because them old wise bucks, they catch scent every one time. They may not leave the area, but a lot of times they won't come back through that one spot right there. They'll change their travel pattern.
And what I mean by kind of that question is there's some that you put more value in than others. More so like if you had one on like a big, like I'm kind of familiar with some of these mountains. I've hunted up here a little bit. Some of these big ridge tops, big flat ridge tops on some of these mountains. The rub line there versus something around the head of a draw, around a bench, or coming off a flat down through a bluff gap. Would you lean towards one that's a harder pinch point than just like a big flat or a big ridge top when it comes to rub lines?
Yeah, and something else. Yeah, I would. Like I said, that's where that deer come from, and these two big ones here is more of a pinch point. But I know what you're talking about. You got some of these mountains up here in the Ozarks that are flat topped, and then you may go off that mountain, 3 or 4 levels down, and then that ridge may take off again and go out there another quarter of a mile out through there. And if there's rubs on that, especially look for a depression. It can be subtle as 5 or 6 foot lower than anything around it. Just like a little sway, like where when it's raining, water trickles across this ridge right there and it don't run over here. But if that deer travels in that little low place right there, I think they feel more secure. And one thing that cameras has done, I use some trail cameras out on public land, is I've set some cameras up in those places, like with this what I'm talking about, on where there's been several rubs, but it's just you can't figure out where you actually want to hunt it. But I thought about, it seemed like I'd see more rubs in that little depression. And last year I got pictures of 2 huge bucks. They were of nighttime, but on this flat point where there's some big rubs in there, and I'll be back there this fall when the wind's right, sitting in there and hunting in there. Like I said, it's this place I'm talking about is probably half a mile before it drops off to bluffy, steep ground again. But this low place cuts across that ridge through there, and it's kind of thick there where that low place is too. It's more open oaks on each side of it, and this place I'm talking about, it's growed up with a lot of short cedars. It's probably an old home place from years ago, back in the 1800s maybe, because there's an old rock wall there. But and I've never killed a deer right there. But I'm gonna be back hunting. I've hunted it the last 2 years. I've seen some bucks there, but not one that I took a shot at. So,
is there anything else about rub lines? Like, well, let me ask you this, actually, because I was thinking about this. Your buddies, you said who are like, yeah, you ain't gonna kill a buck on a rub line. What do you think guys do wrong about if they try to hunt in rub lines versus like what you've done and had success with?
Mm-hmm. That's a hard one to answer because I don't really know exactly how some of them hunt. But a couple of my ladies that has told me that, that they like seeing the rub, but they'd a lot rather hunt a scrape or something like that. And I said, and that's another thing that cameras has taught me. I put cameras on scrapes. And like this last year, I bet 80% of my buck pictures off of scrapes came of a night, and the rest of them came in the middle of the day. That's pretty wild.
Mm-hmm.
I would never thought that without the use of cameras. I would have thought mostly of a night, but and that makes me want to sit and watch some places more during the middle of the day, especially during the prime time from 20th, 21st, 22nd of October till about Thanksgiving. I think midday is a great time to be hunting, even though sometimes weather's pretty warm in October. You know, the latter part of October, but cameras has taught me that on public land. So that may just be me, but what you said, you know, are hunting rub lines. They just don't hunt rub lines. The ones I'm talking about. They say, well, that buck may rub that, you know, 2 bucks may rub that a week ago, and they may never come back through there. I said, well, if that's what you think, but I think they make those rubs because it's a place that they. But you know, if I find one big rub and there's no other rubs there, no, I'm not going to hunt that. But if I see last year's rubs, if I see 3 months of rubs, then I'm going to hunt that rub line. I'll figure out a way to hunt it.
This is like they're marking their travel corridor right there for some reason.
Yeah, I don't know if they're marking their travel corridor or if they just, I don't know why deer do it. I mean, I know they leave scent on rubs. I know on stuff I've heard and read and watched that they do it to help build up their strength and their muscles for fighting other bucks when they're really sparring. You know, whether that's true or not, that's what you hear. But I think that's just a natural thing for them to do while they're traveling, is rubbing trees.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, even if it's a faint trail, you have evidence that there was a buck standing here.
Yeah.
Rub this tree, then rub that tree, then rub that tree. So you get a path to travel with it. Will you give a rub line multiple opportunities to produce for you, or is it like a one and done thing? Like you'll hunt it once or twice and then move on?
No. If I'm confident in a rub line to hunt it, I'll hunt it on and off the whole season when weather permits and the winds permit, stuff like that. You know, it's just that's part of hunting on public land. A lot of people get disgusted because they sit on a rub line 2 or 3 days and don't see anything. I'm done with it. You know, but hunting public land in those mountains, the way I look at it, every day I go set at a spot. Say, I really like this spot and the weather's right and wind's right, and I hunt it a day. I go back and hunt it 3 days later. I hunt it a week later, and then I hunt it with muzzleloader. Then I go back and bow hunt between muzzleloader and gun season. Every day I hunt that, I don't see that buck, my odds are getting better. Every time I hunt it, I think my odds are better. And I've killed a lot of deer in December, big bucks in December, between Thanksgiving and late December. Because we have a hunt here that's called a Christmas holiday hunt. And I've killed some really nice bucks in that 3-day hunt after Christmas. And a lot of the places I hunt is rub lines, especially if those rub lines are associated with food sources. Not necessarily the bucks eating the food sources, but the does, especially late coming in heat does, going to those food sources. And if I can find where that buck's traveling from his bedding area to check those food sources for does coming in, especially, you know, the yearling does come in later than the others, that's what I use to target them, especially in Thanksgiving time and plumb up in, you know, the end of December.
What are those food sources that you like here? Again, Western Arkansas, big woods, mountain country, a lot of big open hardwood forests. What are your food sources that you look for?
Well, your prime one is your acorn crop, especially later in the year. But if you don't have a good mass crop, even if you've got some mass, a lot of times by December it's all gone. You know, between bears, hogs, squirrels, deer, you know, most of it's gone. So then you got to target your secondary food sources. You have a clue what those are?
Greenbrier,
Maybe.
trying to think.
Locust?
No, I probably don't have locusts up here.
Is there a kind of
you ever heard of black gumberries?
Oh, interesting.
Mm-mm.
You never heard of them? They're all over the woods up here. They don't hit every year, but what is really weird, a lot of years when acorns don't hit, black gum trees will produce black gum berries. That's a big turkey food source in the winter too.
I don't think, do we have those in Alabama? I don't know why I'm asking you.
Yeah, I should be asking you. Andrew's
But
the
anyway,
forest-
anybody that hunts these mountains and knows much about the mass crop should know about black gumberries. And that's something deer really target late in the year. If you can find a bench and they grow a lot, especially in rugged, more steep terrain, especially around the heads of hollers and stuff. For why, I don't know, but especially if there's a head of a holler and then like a little flat plateau in the head of that holler. A lot of times big black gums will grow, and you can tell what they look like. Usually they're pretty big size, and 90% of them are hollow, and they'll have squirreled in holes all in them, round holes in them. That's your black gum trees.
Yeah, and that just goes to show too the woodsmanship and understanding where you hunt and understanding what kind of plants are where you hunt and what the deer like to eat where you hunt. I mean, it sounds like it just helps you get more out of your season.
Yeah.
You know, because after the white oaks and everything dry up and you can't find acorns.
But you know, we got all kinds of acorns here. You know, so I'm saying acorn. They're not acorns. They're acorns. But anyway, you have white oaks. You have pin oaks. You have red oaks. You have black oaks. You have spotted oak. You have water oaks, and you have post oak. That's the majority of our oaks up here, and the white oaks, deer love them, but they rot in a hurry. Usually even if there's a big, heavy crop of them, they're usually no good by in December. Your big red oaks and your spotted oak, they're a lot bigger acorn, but a lot of times they're still good in turkey season in the spring. They don't rot like the white oaks do. Some of them do, but most of them are still good. And you have to know what hits, and that's where no matter how much topoing you study, you still got to put these on the ground to find where that stuff is. Mm-hmm. And I think people early don't do a lot of that because two things. It's hot, it's sweaty when you're out scouting looking for where those mast is, but you put the miles and find that mass and find out where it is. That pays off a lot of times in those later hunts, because if you find some red oak, or another one is a little post oak acorn. They stay on the trees till usually around the 1st of December before they even fall off. And if you find some post oak, that place I was telling you about where the low place is, a lot of times they grow on flats like that, down on the side ridges off of a big ridge, is where the post oaks will grow. And if you find them and combined with that depression across that flat, you got a feeding area on one side of that with post oak, you got a bedding area over here, then you want to be sitting there in December watching that low depression that crosses that ridge right there.
To kind of while we're talking about food sources, when I used to live up here in Arkansas and hunted some of this stuff, and I've come back up here a few more times since then, I knew very few deer hunters who were hunting past Thanksgiving. Very, very few.
Yeah, you ain't bothered by a lot of hunters.
That's what I was going to say. So do you also see, again, just kind of jumping while we're talking food sources and just we're on the topic of late season right now, do you see deer kind of shifting back into areas where there's still security cover, but maybe they weren't there back in November as much because of hunting pressure? Or
yeah, they'll move back. I think they move back into areas where hunting pressure leaves. You know, they'll move out. Like I said, they'll move out of an area. You know, not way away, but I think they quit using the area if a lot of people, get in there and they smell hunters and stuff. Because on public, you can control all that on private land, but you can't control anything on public land. You don't know what the other 10 hunters that go out there is going to do. They may everyone come right by where you plan on sitting in a tree and smoke 10 cigarettes, throw them on the ground. And I'm just saying that's what you run across on public land hunting, but that makes it more challenging. And the more challenging it is, the more I like it. I don't care I love killing deer, but I love the challenge of the hunt as much as I love killing the deer. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It's all about the journey and the adventure that gets you there.
Yes, of doing it. When I was younger, I thought I had to kill something. And I don't have to kill anything, but it seems like those two coincide. When you get to where you don't have to kill something, it seems like it not as old saying goes, sometimes it falls in your lap more often.
Oh yeah, yeah. Mountains are a good place to go have an adventure.
Yeah.
Oh.
Man, it's fun hunting.
And what you all said a while ago is true. I bypassed that with my answer, but green bars is a good food source. There's a big wide deer right above, straight above Andrew's head right there. And I killed that deer December 22nd hunting green bars because it was a bad year that year. And there was snow and ice on the ground. What little there was to eat, they couldn't even get to it because it was one of those ice storms where it had inch and a half of solid ice on the ground. And it was kind of even treacherous getting in there where I killed that deer. But I'd hunted him earlier in the year and knew he was in there. I thought, this would be a good time to kill this deer. It was cold, too. It was like 10 degrees the day I killed that deer. And I went in there and to this, it was on a steep mountainside. And I couldn't even go off the mountainside. I went around to where I could get lower, and then I walked around there and got in there. And 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he came in there eating those green bars, and I killed him with a muzzleloader.
Man,
And see, that's part of like food sources you don't hear a lot of guys talk about because they're not the sexy food source like mass is. But it's
The old timers called those saw bars, too. They didn't even call them green bars. They called them saw bars. My dad called them saw bars, saw briars.
but like that to me, that's like a perfect example of like quality woodsmanship. Pay attention to those much more subtle food sources that the average deer hunter, most deer hunter, like they can find. You know, they see. I'll say acorns. I don't say acorns. I say acorns. Clay's gonna give me crap tomorrow about that.
He sure will.
Yeah, it's all good. I'm ready for it. But people can.
He'll even want you to spell it for him.
That's fine.
How do you spell acorn?
I put a K in there. I know he put.
A-K-E-R-N.
I know. Gosh.
I need to get one of those T-shirts.
Listen, I'm going to tell it to the next biologist we interview on the podcast, and they're going to look at me like, "Son, you did not go to college." No, but going back to it, it's like most guys can pick out mass crop, but those subtle forbs and again different food sources that the average person might not even think of deer really eating on it all that much is part of like on those like you're talking about hard mass years. We have some early frost kills off. We just don't have a great mass year, drought, whatever. And the deer have to feed. They have to eat on other things and be able to figure out what that is in the mountains and key on, like hunting a greenbrier patch, sawbriar patch. A lot of your average guys aren't going to do that. They're going to have confidence on it. So, and is it one of those things that if you get late season and you get a year like that real bad mass crop year, will you find just a ton of droppings in and around those little greenbrier patches up there on the mountain?
Yeah, you will. You'll find, and a lot of times, you'll find fresh rubs around those places. I'm gonna throw this at you too. In that late season like that, especially when deer have been pressured, and like I told you, I think bucks stay bedded all day long a lot of times, especially big mature bucks. There's no scientific deal on anything, but it's on my scientific agenda. If you go to a place like that, whether it's greenbriers, whether it's black gumberry flat, or a head of a holler where there's black gumberries, or if it's some red oak acorns you found, that's still under the leaves and they can get to them. If you find those areas where the earlier rub line was, and you find droppings there, but not just any dropping. You find big clumped up droppings. I think what causes that a lot is deer staying in their bed all day. And then when they get up, start moving their bowels, then those big droppings come out in big. I know you all have probably seen those before. And they're not 100% sure that it's a buck dropping, but I'd say 80% of the time it is. If a doe stays bed a lot, they will do the same thing, I think. But if you're finding some big droppings, and like I hunted a food plot several years ago. This was back in the 90s, late season. I killed that deer. It was a big old 9-point. I killed him on New Year's Day. Back then we had a muzzleloader that run till New Year's Day, from Christmas to New Year's Day. That's before they started the Christmas holiday hunt. And all I found, I didn't find any fresh rubs around that food plot, but I found some big old droppings and a lot of doe droppings, or I presumed it was. The third evening I sat there, I killed that deer with my muzzleloader at 20 yards, right at dusky dark. He came in there. There was 7 does already in that food plot, and I don't think he was coming to eat. I think he was coming to check those does because he was circling that food plot. But I was in a tree on the outskirts of it about 100 yards from it, and I killed him between me and the food plot.
Swinging around the food plot.
Yeah, I think he was just scenting for does.
Mm.
And the day before that, even before that, I saw a deer behind me. I was closer to the food plot, and I moved my climber stand that next evening and moved it farther out, and I think it's that same deer. I think he came in there, but he was staying out of the food plot until it got dark to go in and check those does out or eat, whatever he's going to do. But I think it was the same deer because he come from the same direction.
Now, do you, we hunt some mountains in Alabama, and when you're talking about greenbriers, it immediately popped up this area that I found right at the end of last season when I was going through there, and it was post rut, but I had my rifle with me, but I was really scouting and I was just covering ground, and I found on the side of this ridge where a bunch of trees had gotten blown down, and there was some mountain laurel, there was some holly, and there was a bunch of greenbrier. And there's
it up in there.
Oh yeah, it was all grown up together, and then right on the top edge of it, there was a real nice heavy trail, and there was all those doe droppings on it, like you're talking about, clumped up, but like small droppings, but they were clumped up.
Yeah.
And then when I got above that, I found a scrape on a little terrain feature above that I'm not kidding you, it's almost as wide from me to you. It was humongous, and there's big clumped up turds all over it and everything, all around it. And I actually forgot about this, but I put a camera on it, and I remembered I put it there yesterday. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to check that camera. But it made me immediately think of that. And one thing that I wonder about around here, because I've never tromped around these mountains where you hunt, when you find those isolated little areas where you've got the greenbrier or thick patches, is it like you walk through a lot of country where there's no deer and then you find them and they're all kind of stacked in one area? Or
Yeah.
Or they're deer kind of all over the place?
No, in these mountains, I mean, there's some deer scattered throughout it, but especially when food sources are plummeted down, whether it's mast or whether it's greenbriers or whatever, the deer are more congregated, but they're harder to hunt then until you find them. You know, it's a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one thing that I always like to ask guys like you.
Yeah, but to answer that is that a lot of times you find a spot like that and then, you know, there they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it seems like you got to just cover ground.
Yeah.
You got to walk through a lot of nothing.
Yeah.
Before you find them.
And you may walk through a lot of nothing and not find them too.
Yeah,
but that's part of it.
Yeah. Now, the other thing I wanted to ask is something that you said earlier about how you were hunting that bluff gap, and there's 10 benches between you and the bottom of the mountain, and there's 10 benches between where you're sitting and the top of the mountain. So it's very staircase-like around here. So in that situation, let's take the bluff gap out of it. How do you determine what bench to hunt? I mean, or do you even like hunting benches?
Yeah, but that's I don't sit and watch a bench very much. That's when I slip hunt. I think if I know benches are that's more thick and secluded and maybe even narrower, then what I like to do is get on a bench where I've found sign or where I think they should be deer, whether they're bedded or whatever, whether it's does bedded or bucks bedded, and I'll get on that little narrow bench that may not be 20 yards wide. And you're liable to kill a deer on that bench. So that's why I slip hunt it. I'll move really slow, but I don't slip hunt the edge of that bench. I move back to where maybe I can just barely see down to the next bench, and I make my way along slow. And then when I get to a good place where I want to watch, I may move a little bit closer and sit down there against a tree or on a rock or whatever and watch that a little bit. Then I'll get up and move on along. But I've killed a lot of deer doing just that in that terrain where there's no really a pinch point on that whole mountainside, but I know deer in there, is I'll slip on a bench like that, and I use the wind. And it's kind of aggravating because you slip hunt all the way around through there like that, and you go around there a mile and a half around the side of that mountain. You've not seen anything. You can't just turn around and slip hunt your way back because you're going to have the wind at your back. So what I do then, instead of slip hunting a bench, I slip hunt the hillside above a bench. Because if it's during the day, the thermal's going to be taking your scent up. So I don't even worry about that bench up above me, up there. I'll hunt a hillside, even though it's hard to walk and maneuver your way around. It takes more time. Then, without the wind in your face, you at least got the thermal coming up a little bit. So you hunt that hillside and you watch that little growed up thick bench below you and slip hunt around it the same way.
I kind of accidentally did that in Georgia. Just kind of a funny story about that. We were bow hunting in Georgia a couple years ago, North Georgia in the mountains. And the mountains up there are kind of like what you're talking about. They're almost terraced. Like there'd be a nice bench and then you go up a little bit, there'd be another one, then another one and another one. And I was trying to find a feed tree to hunt because it was September. And I would hit a bench and I would just ease around it like what you're talking about, really slow. And basically what happened that whole week is when I was slipping, looking for a feed tree, I was seeing deer. Like I'd look down to the bench below me and there'd be a doe at like 20 yards and I always got busted. But then when I would sit down in a tree and hunt, I never saw anything. It was only when I was slipping and going through there. Yeah. Now, are you also doing that with a bow or is that primarily a rifle thing?
I do it with a bow too. But what I do with a bow is I usually don't slip the edge of a bench unless I'm just hunting that bench. But then I don't hunt the edge of it. I hunt the hills. I hunt, like if it's a 20 or 30 yard wide bench, then I'll slip hunt right up against the hillside. And then if I'm bow hunting, slip. But if I'm gun hunting or muzzleloader hunting, where in reach, I'll do this like what I was talking about. Hunt the edge of that where you can see the bench you're on, the hillside above you, and the hillside below you. When you ease over, you don't want to see that whole hillside below you, in my opinion, because you're outlining your whole body and you're a lot easier spotted than you are this much of you sticking above the terrain break from that bench below you to that one up there. So,
Now, another thing that I can't remember if we mentioned it during the podcast or if we were just talking about it before, but you hunt with a recurve bow and a longbow.
Yes, that's what I hunt with primarily.
So, I mean, that sounds really hard. Slipping into the mountains with a recurve bow.
It is hard.
So, do you do anything like vastly different than if you're using a compound with that? I mean, because I guess your range is what, 25 yards, 20 yards?
I'm comfortable shooting out to 30 yards. I'd rather it be 20 yards or 15 yards. And like I said, I hunted 2 or 3 years with a compound. I just didn't enjoy it like I did hunting with the recurve and longbow. And but yeah, I'm comfortable out that. But it's got to be at 30 yards. It's got to be a perfect shot, and everything's got to be still, nothing moving. Everything's got to be right. I've shot deer on the move before 15, 20 yards, but that's no problem for me if I've got an open shot. Everybody says, grunt at them, get them to stop, whatever. Well, the thing about with a recurve, or that's the way I hunt. I mean, I can if I have to, but I'm a lot better shot if I'm just right here. When I get ready to shoot, I just draw and release as soon as I hit. I don't even know what my anchor point is really. I just know I draw and I release. But it's probably is a little harder, but it's the same way. I enjoy doing it, and it's just the way I like to hunt. So,
what about not still hunting, but setting up in a tree with a longbow or a recurve bow, and just positioning yourself again in big open woods? How do you go about picking the exact right tree where that deer is going to come that close to you in such a big
to start
land?
with, I usually don't hunt big open woods. I know what you're saying. No, I mean I really look for terrain features in when I'm bow hunting out of a tree, and I'll usually hunt with a bow. I'll hunt closer to two areas because you can usually funnel. You can narrow your space down whether you're hunting deer going back to bedding area in the morning or if you're hunting of evening going to food source. I usually position myself closer to those two areas when I'm bow hunting than I do where I can reach out there and see a farther distance with a muzzleloader or a gun. Does that answer?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, I try to find that spot that I think that deer's going to come within 30 yards of me. Mm-hmm. You nick it down with the gun, you're narrowing it down to 100 yards, just say, for example, or even a muzzleloader, In these woods, about 100 yards where you can see, as far as you can see, unless you're on the hillside watching a bench way below you, then you can see farther in the woods. But
those setups, like those terrain features, we already talked about the bluff gap, but what about the heads of a draw or the head of a canyon like you were talking about earlier, where you're finding where the bucks, instead of, again, if there's ridges going up to the main mountain, instead of going way down every holler, they're cutting up around the top where that holler kind of runs into the mountainside?
Yeah. Well, like if you've got a big bench here, and then you've got these little sub benches, I call them, they're little narrower benches above it or even below it, then that's where I want to bow hunt. I want to bow hunt one of those, but I'm not going to get in the head of that holler, because you get in the head of that holler, the only thing you got in your advantage is a thermal. And in the mountains, if there's any wind at all, it's going to swirl on you. Even the thermal will swirl a little bit. So I don't actually hunt the head of that holler. I hunt to that little narrow bench that's leading into the head of that holler. So like if, say, there's a big bench up here, and then it goes into a holler and a big steep ravine there, but there's a little narrow bench down there 50 yards below that big bench, then that's one I'm going to target. I'm going to target it within 100 yards of where it crosses the head of that holler, but I'm hoping that way the deer, when he's coming, he don't mind dropping down and doing that, but they like traveling the narrow benches anyway. But I think they do that. I think they'll come around a big bench or the edge of it, then they'll fall off a little bit, and you can look at trails, little dim trails like I was talking about there, and you'll see that a lot of times. When a big bench starts narrowing down, you'll see a little sub-trail go off to the next little place, and then you'll see that going around the head of that right there instead of going on across and that way. Not saying they won't, but you're trying to take advantage of that to get a deer within bow range. That's where I will set up with a bow on that terrain feature. I won't set up on the big bench in the head of the holler. I'll set up the one below it or the one up above it somewhere. And because usually I don't think they do this to cross them. I think they do this to cross them, but they don't do this to cross them as much. So,
right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And is that a rut thing, or do you do that early season also?
Early season too. I just think the deer, that's just natural for bucks to travel that way.
That's one thing I'm really, really curious about is early season bow hunting in the mountains, and whether or not are you trying to hunt on a hot white oak and find a feature, or are you more hunting those little narrow benches and travel corridors, even in the early season?
In the early season, if I know where there's some white oaks that are going to fall, then that's where I'm going to target it. If there's a terrain feature like that leads into that, if that white oak is out on this little point here, and I think the deer are bedding over here in this thick, rough ground or whatever, then I may use that terrain feature, what I'm just talking about. But with a bow, I probably won't be on the side of that. I won't be on the side of the, if I think they're getting up of evening to bed, from their beds, to come into that white oak of evening, because you can't narrow down that bedding area as much as you can that food source. That's what I was talking about earlier. Then I target the food source area and try to pick me a spot closer to it to help me get a deer within bow range of me. So,
yeah, and that's one of the hard parts about mountains, at least in my experience, is really food or bedding. A lot of times it's kind of hard to narrow down. It's one or the other, both of them.
Yeah,
it's kind of difficult to narrow down. And I feel like it changes year to year too.
Yeah,
like just because they bedded in one spot last year, maybe they won't this year.
They won't this year.
So that's what you've seen as well?
Yeah, and that's what I was saying too. I think bucks, because they roam, I think they roam more than people think they do, especially in the mountains. But I think that they may have several bedding areas that they bed in, but they still go to them places where they think does are going to be, or if they're just early season, like now we got a real early bow season here. And, I know they're not thinking about does in, so you got to really think about bedding and food sources in.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm going to get off the early season stuff, if you don't mind.
Okay, yeah.
And I want you to kick us off. I want to talk rut hunting with you. Say muzzleloader to rifle season, that mid-October.
From 20th October to Thanksgiving.
The favorite time.
That month time.
I've always loved being in Arkansas. Do you have a good story of especially slip hunting and killing a good buck, whether it's around a bluff or around one of those benches or anything like that, around that time frame? One that comes to mind that's memorable?
About 5 years ago. That buck right there. one right straight behind me.
Okay.
All rack,
Oh yeah.
8-point. That's heavy frame. Got long G2s. That deer, I don't remember the whole situation on it, but it was later in that muzzleloader season, like the 6th or 7th day of it. And it had rained that night. And it had rained that morning hard. And I didn't even hunt that morning. And I knew it was supposed to quit about 9 or 10 o'clock. So I went ahead and drove out into the mountains, sat in my truck till it quit raining hard. And I knew I'd found rubs from this deer during bow season. And I decided, well, I'm going to slip hunt this area because it's wet. It was still drizzling, but not hard rain. And it's damp. And I thought if I can get I've killed more deer than that one in that area. But that one comes to mind because you just asked. And like I said, it was just a few years ago. And I took and got the wind where it needed to be. And I was on top of the mountain where I started, where I parked my truck. I went over the side of the mountain to the second bench. And I mean, the ground to it, you can't hardly walk on. It's just so steep. But I got to that second bench, and I could see another little bench below me, about 100 yards below me. But I knew they could be on either one of them. I thought, well, if them deer's been prowling all night, right now would be a good time. They're either going to be bedded or... So anyway, I just started slip hunting that bench. And I don't remember exactly what all took place other than I'd go a little bit, and I'd watch, like I talked about earlier. I'd look over the hill, then I'd ease back, and I'd slip a little bit farther. And I'd slipped around there a little ways. I'd probably been gone from where I took off from probably an hour and a half because it was about 10:30 or 11 o'clock that day. Might even been a little later than that. I don't remember the exact time, but I just remember I was slipping along and something caught movement out in front of me on this little narrow bench. And I just remembered seeing something and I just froze. But I was right by a tree and I just kind of leaned up against it and just stood there. But I could still see the hillside and that bench below me. And I kept looking at it, but I kept looking back where I'd seen that movement. I thought, I'm going to stay here a little bit. I didn't sit down and I just stayed leaned up against that tree. And then about that time I saw movement again. I thought, what is it I'm seeing? You know, I can see something move, but I ain't sure what it is. Maybe a squirrel. And then finally it moved again. And I saw about this much of bone, horn, moving. And then it moved again, and I could see its full rack. And what had happened, this deer was bedded. And it either saw me or heard me or something other, and it had stood up when I saw that movement. And I just crouched in next to that tree there when I seen those horns, and I got my muzzleloader up, and then I could make out the deer. But all I could see was its head and its horns and its neck down to where it joined its shoulder. And I thought, and the deer was looking towards me. I thought, it's now or never. It was probably 60, 70 yards out there to the deer. I thought, it's now or never. So the best I could, I leaned into that tree and steadied my shot. Pulled the trigger, the smoke bolt. I still use black powder in my guns. And it's, you know, what it looks like when you shoot. And that wet, damp, misty day. And when the smoke cleared, I didn't see nothing. I couldn't see a deer kicking. I couldn't see nothing. I thought, well, I'm going to ease on out there. I reloaded my muzzleloader, eased on, went easing that away, and I got about 20 yards, and I seen something out there, and the deer was laying on his side. He'd fell right where I shot him. I'd hit him right at the base of the neck, right where it joined his shoulder. And the best I could tell, he had bedded there. He'd been there a while because his bed underneath him was dry. So he just stood up. And whether he saw me or heard, but he knew something was going on, but he didn't, with the conditions, he didn't know what was going on. He stood up and gave me a shot, and then it took me the rest of the day to get him out of there. But I didn't break him down, but I just took my time, and I knew an old wagon road on around the hill. I took him around that old wagon road, then made my time making him back up to where I could drag him back to where the old road was, where I'd parked on. But that was a pretty memorable slip hunt.
Now, I love that. And the reason why I wanted to bring that up or have you tell a story, kind of get us into talking that late October, November hunting is, of course, you're getting to the pre-rut, rut, and then kind of getting to the later part of the rut by the end of October. Is with that hunting style, would you say last, say, 10 years or so, during that time of the year, is it a mix between you hunting in a tree stand and in slip hunting or hunting on the ground, or is it more leaning towards the slip hunting?
It's probably about half and half. It just depends on conditions, and the terrain has a lot to do with it. But I'd say I do about half and half. And I do a lot of stand hunting where I'm not up in a tree too. In those steep mountains, a lot of times you're better off if you get a good vantage point, especially like in the head of a holler we was talking about. In a rifle or muzzleloader instant, if you got the thermals coming up, of course you like to be there at daylight too, but a lot of times that ain't a good place to set at daylight if that thermal's taking your scent right down to where you think the deer are going to cross. So a lot of times I won't hunt the same place the first hour or two of daylight so I don't want to be moving a stand. So I may set somewhere else for an hour or two. Then as the sun breaks out, if it does break out, then I may move around that hillside or off in the holler a bit where I can see the head of that holler, where I can see a couple of little benches, or like I was talking about where sometimes I think they travel those heads of hollers, and I'll just get me a good place, set on the ground, take me a cushion, and get comfortable and set on the ground. I've killed a lot of deer doing that too. But I consider that stand hunting just like hunting out of a tree. I don't consider that slip hunting because I'm going to a spot and I'm going to stay there until I leave. Whereas slip hunting, I'll slip hunt and I may sit there 5 minutes. If I'm seeing deer, I may sit there 5 hours once I sit down while I'm slip hunting. If everything feels right and I see deer traveling, I see a doe or two travel. And you can kind of do that sitting in the stand, but usually when I do that on stand hunting on the ground, I've made my mind up. I'm going to stay here till noon or stay here till 11 o'clock or whatever. When I make my mind in going that. When I'm slip hunting, I have no time frame on nothing.
Is there anything else that you'll do during that October, November hunt that you won't do at other points of the season? Like how you like to hunt rutting deer or pre-rut deer? Is there anything you do different or any slight different approach?
Yeah, a little bit. I'd say when I know, like, especially here, it seems like most of the doe chasing takes place here from about the 10th of November to, I'm not saying they don't do it other times. I've seen them chasing does in 20th of October, running them hard. But I'd say that a lot of it happens from the 10th of November till after Thanksgiving. And that time, a lot of times I'll hunt more where I think the does are going to be more than I think where the bucks are going to travel. But it kind of coincides with each other too, because that time of year, and I'd probably do more stand hunting then than any other time. Is that time frame from first few days of November till after Thanksgiving. I probably hunt stands more then than any other time. Although I will slip hunt if the conditions are right and I'm wanting to cover some terrain during that same time. But I'll probably do more stand hunting there than later in the season. And like I do a lot of slip hunting during that muzzleloader season, because I think that's when bucks are making a lot of their sign, and whether they're making scrapes or traveling through corridors or whatever.
Do you ever use calling much at all for deer hunting, rattling or grunting or anything like that?
I don't do much rattling. I have a little rattle bag I keep with me all the time. I use it once in a while, and my time frame for using it is usually, most of the time, is in that same, it's from about I've done it a little bit in bow season, but it's usually in the October part of bow season when I do it, not the early part. And I rattle some usually during our first muzzleloader hunt, which is somewhere around the 18th to 20th October till the last weekend in October, a 9-day hunt. But grunting, I use it quite a bit. To give you an example, this pack frame buck here where I told you I killed him, 15 minutes before he showed up, I'd done several series of grunts, some of the tendon grunts with the long brrr. Whether he was coming to that, I don't know, because it was probably 10 minutes or so before he showed up. But I'd done it on and off throughout the day. I'd probably done it. I'd been there, since daylight. I might have done it 8 or 10 times all morning. So you don't know if they come to that or where they were coming through there anyway. But I do grunt when I'm setting, and I also grunt when I'm slip hunting some. Just depending on what terrain I'm in and where I'm at. I get to a good spot, I may stop there and I may sit down on a log or a rock and I may grunt a few series, and then just sit there for an extra 10 or 15 minutes, see if anything shows up. And I've killed a few deer doing that.
I probably should have asked you this earlier in the podcast, but I know you're born and raised in this area, always hunting the mountains. What do you love about hunting the mountains for whitetails?
It's probably in my DNA to start with, because I grew up in the mountains, started hunting in the mountains, started squirrel hunting and coon hunting when I was just a young kid. But I think the challenge of it intrigues me more than anything. Just trying to narrow down these places like we're talking about. My wife even accuses me that. She said, "You think about hunting all the time." I said, "Yeah, I do." So
I had a question about, we were talking earlier about how they change it up year to year. What is something, let's just say this deer season, you've obviously, you got a lot of history here and you've been hunting it for a long time.
Yeah.
So what do you do to prepare for the season where you're going to narrow down your areas that you want to hunt? Are you just going and revisiting old spots? Are you checking out new things? Like, what's your process every year to get keyed up to where the deer are at?
a lot of that has to do, if I get to hunt, if I haven't tagged my bucks out or whatever, if I get to hunt in December, I base a lot of where I turn around it, because in my opinion, in these mountains, I think where the deer are, especially in early to mid-October, if there's food sources and everything for them, I think they're in the mountains. They're in close to that same proximity in late December. Don't know if that's true or not, but I've killed deer from year to year in them same areas that I've, like where I've killed a deer or found, like if I find fresh rubs and buck droppings, clump droppings, in December, I've hunted that same area in early October with a bow or early October muzzleloader or mid-October muzzleloader and killed good bucks in those areas that I found that sign. So I prepare that way. That's one way I prepare. The other way is I usually put my foot traffic on and I find those areas that has mast to hunt early season. Like I said, like you said, like the white oaks. Because if you say, "Oh, I'm gonna go hunt this because there was deer all over that last year eating those white oaks," but you don't know those white oaks are there unless you go in there. You don't know they're going to produce, because you know white oaks will produce every year, but you don't know that they're going to produce this next year unless you go check it out and see if. You don't have to go while it's hunting season. That's why I said some people don't like to scout early, but I do. You can take your little binoculars, whatever, and you can look at them trees and you can tell if there's acorns up in there or not. You know. And if you scouted early and the deer were in there last year in December, and you go there and there's acorns there now, or there was deer in that proximity, you know, even though they may not have been eating those white oaks, but if you found sign late, like buck sign, and that also tells you on public land there's a good chance they survived. If you find big sign or whatever in October, but you don't get to hunt it anymore later in the year, you don't know if that deer got killed in November or December. But if you go there Christmas time and you find big sign and you don't kill him and you don't hear nobody shoot while you're in there, it's a good bet that deer's back in there early that next fall if it's a place to hunt him. But then you got to put, like I said, put your feet on, or just take a wild chance and go in there. And I've done that before too, and I've had luck, and I've done that before and never seen nothing. So there's a lot of variables and all that. So
yes, I mean, a couple things that people could be looking for if they wanted to do summer scout in late summer, right before season. They could look for the mast. They could look for historic rubs from years past.
Yes.
And then those pinch points, right?
Yep. But I will bring this back too. And another thing that affects me a lot of times on where I hunt early is what I find during turkey season. Old sign that I find while I'm turkey hunting. Because these mountains, I cover lots of ground turkey hunting. And I hunted a deer for 3 years, never saw him. I even put a camera up there and never had a camera picture of him or nothing, which it's rare to get, you know. But I found these sheds. I found a big set of sheds, turkey scouting the last week of March. And I'd killed some deer in there, but I'd never killed a big deer in there. But these sheds were big 10-point sheds, you know, that are massive. Got big tines, heavy mass to them. And I went in there early that next fall, put up a couple of cameras. Never saw him, but I would find sign. For 2 years in a row, I found sign, like some big rubs and stuff in there. Saw some more smaller bucks in there, passed them up, hoping to get a shot at that big deer. Never saw him. Then the third year I hunted him, This has been about 7 years ago, last time I hunted him. Didn't see no fresh sign. Didn't see no bigger. Saw some smaller rubs. And I think either he moved his train or he got old and died or what. But I've been back in there a couple times. I went in there 2 years ago and hunted and found some more sign, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't the buck I was hunting 7 years ago, because he was probably a 5-year-old, 5.5-year-old, or maybe 6-year-old when I found these sheds. But that determines a lot of times where I hunt the following year if I find stuff that. Because I turkey hunt some of the same places. I turkey hunt some of the same places I deer hunt. So,
And also, turkey hunting is a great way to learn terrain
features, find bluff gaps and stuff like that. Now they've got, and I've got it on my phone. They've got Onyx and stuff. But up till, I didn't get that till 2 years ago. All that stuff stayed right up here.
I wanted to ask you that. How did you organize? I mean, you've been hunting up here for decades. How did you organize all your spots in your head? Did you put it on a paper map, or did you just have to try to remember everything?
I just remember stuff. My wife says I remember stuff too well. But no, I mean, I did. I just I don't know how I've been able to do it, but I mean, I can take you back to a place 20 years ago where there was some huge scrapes, some huge rubs. I've got a great memory. Yeah, but now I have marked a few things on my Onyx phone now that I've got it on my phone. But sometimes I have to think about it and think, well, where is it at? I sit on my phone and I go think, oh, I know where that is.
Yeah, put some notes in there in those pins, what the spot is.
Yeah.
Well, I ain't figured that part out today. I just put a pin spot on it. But if I look at it and then look at the terrain and look where it is, and I can remember why I put it on there usually. So,
growing up here, did you ever get into reading topo maps at all, or was it mostly just boots on the ground?
Yeah, I put boots in, but I read topo maps. When I first, at that time frame I was talking about when I killed those first 2 bucks, I was actually at the time working for the U.S. Forest Service, marking timber and stuff. And so I had access to maps, and I used maps then to help me and to look at stuff, and figure out terrain features and that I didn't really understand until I worked at the Forest Service. I worked there for about 4 years.
It is just kind of mentioned terrain features. Is there any other terrain features up here in the Ozarks that are either unique here, or any other features that hold some kind of value for you that bucks may be using at some point of the season?
It's probably not unique here, but it is unique because of the way the terrain is with the benches and the steep hillsides. But the edges here are a little different. Like a 20-year-old clear cut that goes halfway up on a ridge, say a little finger ridge that goes off the side of the big mountain. The other side of this is just wooded hardwood timber. A lot of times that terrain feature right there is where I'll find those rub lines. I think especially bucks like to travel the edge of the thick cover, but right on the edge of the open woods. So I don't know if that's much diverse anywhere else, but a lot of times in other places, like I've hunted some in the Ouachitas, and when you get to those places like that, usually it's on the terrain break is on a big ridge, like a steep top like that, or way down low somewhere, where it's bigger, wider. You'll have a real thick place in the pine and hardwoods, and then all of a sudden it opens up here. But up here, a lot of that where they used to do a lot of clear cutting up here in these mountains on the Ozark National Forest, a lot of times that's where they'd break. For some reason, they'd break it on some of those little finger ridges that goes off the side. They'd be clear cut down that finger ridge and all the way around the mountain this way, then back this way wouldn't be. But it seemed like for some reason they like to travel that little ridge. That's one I can think of right now that's maybe different from other places. But that kind of coincides with rub lines sometimes. Not always, but it does sometimes.
I do want you to tell one story. And we've talked about it, and you've told the story before, but selfishly I want you to tell it. You got a mountain lion story. And I want to talk about it.
Well, it's a story. I don't know if it's mountain lion or what it is, but it's a story.
Big old bloodhound with no ears, I guess, came running through. Well, let me say this. When I used to live in Arkansas up here, I was telling you, one of my teachers, it was his uncle, I think, was part of the group of guys that he told me. I haven't confirmed this. I found the photo online though. It is online. Of I think it was the last confirmed killed mountain lion in the state of Arkansas, and it was in the early 70s. I think is when that happened. He was a young kid. He was part of the photo. They had it hung up and everything. And when I lived up here, everybody I met up here, all of them had some kind of mountain lion story. Most of the guys were hunters. Some of them run chicken farms, run up and down the road, seeing something across the road they can't explain. But it's always one of those things that's super interesting. Because we were a little bit further west, a little bit different from down in Alabama where we're from. You guys seeing that and seeing Black Panthers, which I'm sure we're going to talk about a little bit tomorrow. But also, I've never met someone who saw anything that they thought could have been a big cat while they were in the stand. Most of I was always driving down the road, seeing the back half of it. Don't know exactly what it is, but they see a tail. Was there tales of that with you growing up with some of the older guys that you were?
Yeah. You would hear somebody seeing a mountain lion now and then. My dad, the only time that he said he saw something, but he wasn't even sure. One night he'd been out working late. I don't remember if he had helped some other farmer or what, but I remember him coming home and just telling. He said, "Man, I saw something across the road. It was raining and stuff." He said, "But I'm 99% sure it wasn't a deer." He said, "But it was tan colored." And he said, "But it looked more like a cat, you know." But he said, "Whether it was mountain lion, I don't know." He said, "But it was something, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't a deer." But I remember him talking about that, and where he saw that at would be only about a mile from where I think the story you're asking me about occurred. So
Same general area.
same general area.
Yeah, when I was here, the cattle farm down the road from us, they had a couple calves get killed, and like newborn calves, and one of them supposedly, the guy was telling me, the hand out there, they found it up in the tree, out in one of the pastures, which was an interesting story. I never got to go see it. He didn't have photos, but they were talking about it. Is there a lot of people in this part of the state that have some kind of story like that? Is it like they've seen or hear something?
No, not a lot. You
Okay.
hear of it just now and then. You know, people think they saw one, you know, or saw something, but not very many. Not very many that I've ever talked to or knowed about actually saw a mountain lion and would say 100% sure that's what they saw, you know. But I did see one, you know, and 100% sure that's what I saw. And in the same big drainage in there is where I had the mountain lion story you was talking about. So
Yeah.
I was bow hunting when I saw the one and just saw it for 10 seconds one evening before dark. It come by. I was in a tree bow hunting with my recurve bow, and it walked past me, you know, 30 yards of me. And I'm 100% sure that's what it was, you know, because I saw the whole thing. So I saw its big sweeping tail and the tan colored.
And how far was it?
About 30 yards of me. I was up in a tree. And it first come out of the bushes, come through an open. I thought, whoa. I see what I thought I saw, and it went behind some more trees. And probably 10 seconds in, it come out from behind those bushes. I was sitting watching a little narrow bench like we talked about earlier that I'd bow hunt on. And then it come right below me there, and then went into a bunch of pawpaw bushes and stuff, which was real thick. I thought, that's a dadgum mountain lion, you know? That's what it was. Mm-hmm. And this was like an hour before dark in the evening. I sat there about another 10 minutes. And then I got down out of my tree, and I walked back out of there before dark. It just spooked me, you know? And
I'd have done the same thing.
Yeah.
I'd have done the same thing. I'd be like, well, the spot shot. I'm out.
But anyway, that same drainage, and then like where my dad thought he saw something at the head of that drainage where the main county road goes around the head of that canyon.
Mm-hmm.
I was down in the canyon. On the other side of the canyon, if that's what you want me to tell, is where I shot the deer and stuff.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I mean, I was thinking of both the stories. But yeah, definitely.
They kind of coincide.
Yeah, they
together.
do coincide because the same area.
Yeah, it's a couple of years difference in the time frame on it there. But the other story was I was hunting in December, hunting a greenbrier patch. It was in the December muzzleloader season. Long story short, I went there that afternoon. Actually, I wasn't sitting on the ground. There was an old tree had fell down. It blowed down, and it was up off the ground about 6 or 8 feet. I just walked up on it and sat down in the forks of it there, took me a cushion and sat there. And just before dark, a deer come around the hill, and I saw it was a nice buck. It was kind of a far shot for my muzzleloader. It was this open-sided muzzleloader, one of these old Renegades up here. And it was probably 70 or 80 yards, but it got stopped there, and I took a shot, and the deer ran off. I went out there and found a little bit of blood where it was standing. And by that time, it's getting pretty late, and I've got about an hour walk out of there, where I'd walked into that canyon from where I'd parked up on top of the mountain. And I still didn't find much blood, and it was ice and snow on it. I mean, it was that old hard ice. It had snowed, and then it had come some freezing rain on top of it, so it had a crust on it. And you couldn't even really see where the deer walked, but you could see specks of blood. And then it got getting later, and I thought, well, I'm going to get my light out. I didn't have my light. I didn't have no light on me at all. So I debated on, well, it's 15 degrees out here. This deer ain't going to spoil. I think I've hit it good enough to kill it because I found some spots of blood, but it looked like lung blood. And so I walked out of there. Long story short, I slept, got up early the next morning, got over at daylight, went back in there where it was at. Went probably 50 yards from where I'd left it that night. And there was a big pool of blood a big bunch of blood. It laid right there and died. It was lung blood all over the snow. Not a deer to be found. I looked all around. Thought somebody's coming here and found my deer, I thought, well, maybe coyotes got it, But I thought if coyotes got it, they'd be hair and stuff everywhere. There wasn't no hair. There wasn't nothing there. And I looked it over. I didn't find any hair anyway. I circled and I circled and I circled. I stayed there most of the morning looking. Never found anything. Thought, well, I can't believe that deer got up, but it got up and left out of here, even though it bled that much blood and it looked like lung blood. You can see it even after it froze, there's that bubbly looking blood on the snow on that ice. Jump forward. That was December till April. I was back in that same area, turkey hunting. And I was a bench above where I killed that deer, or where I shot the deer. At the time, I didn't know if I'd killed it or not, but I thought I had. I just couldn't find it. And I was walking around this little narrow bench, and I got thinking about it. This ain't far from where I lost that deer last year, Yeah, stuff goes through your mind, and I'd probably made some call. I hadn't heard any turkeys, but I was just walking, calling. I looked out around the bench there from me, probably 100 yards, and I could see something white. But what am I seeing out there? There was no tree that on the hillside like they grow. They grow a little bit angled like that, and it went up, and it was actually a big old
gum.
Yeah, one of them black gum trees. It went up, forked out like that, and it had a kind of a big fork end up there, up off the ground, because they're usually pretty straight until they finally fork. Then they'll fork out up high, kind of like a lot of white oaks do. The old skinny white oaks don't fork till they get way up there. Anyway, I got to where I could see out there, and I thought, that looked like something, bones or something other up there. I just kept easing towards it, and I got within 30 yards, and I looked, and there's a back skeleton of a deer and a rack of horns and a skull laying up in this tree, in the forks of that tree up there. That's, it's probably 15 foot off the ground, but it's probably 25 or 30 foot up that tree, but it's so steep, I couldn't climb it. And I stood there, and that's a stupid deer carcass up there. I thought, I shot that deer last year right below here on the bench below here, 100 yards down this steep hillside below here. How did that deer get up there? And this is all going through my mind. I thought, that's got to be my deer. That's got to be the deer I killed. And then something drug it up here. And then it crossed my mind, what would take it up in a tree like that? And I guess a bear could too, but I don't think a bear would do that. I've seen bear kills out in the woods, and they usually just cover them up on the ground. They rake leaves up on them and stuff. But I've heard of cats taking stuff up and leaving them in trees, so other scavengers don't get to them as easy. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I've heard that. Anyway, so I was thinking, what have I got? Well, I just happened to have, which I don't a lot of times have in turkey season, but I had some cordies. I may even left in my pants from back in deer season. I don't know, but I had some rope there, and I found me a rock and tied it in this like paracord stuff. I went throwing it up that, and finally I throwed it, and it went through enough on that the rock hung up. I don't remember if it hung in the rib cage or what, but I was able to pull that stuff out of the tree and pull it down, and it looked just like the deer I'd shot It was a nice 8-point buck, not super big, probably 14, 15 inches wide, but a nice buck for the mountains. And I'm just telling myself, man, that's that stupid deer. That had to be a cat take it up into that tree. That's all I could fathom it was. And anyway, I took and broke the skull stuff off the backbone, and I put it in my turkey vest on the back vest, and I carried it out, and I've got it here at the house now. But that's pretty wild.
Yeah, and well, then a year or two later,
Yeah.
you had what you just told earlier, the story of that one walking by.
I saw a cat walk by me. I was on the other side of the canyon, but I was in the same canyon. And that same, I probably ain't never told nobody. Well, I've told a few people. I know I didn't tell Clay when I told the story, but in that same canyon, a few years prior to that, I found some tracks in the head of a holler there, and you know how hollers will run down, they wash sand and dirt up and make a real soft place. I couldn't swear that's what it was, but it sure looked like a bobcat track, but as big as my fist. But it had rained in it a little bit, but it wasn't clear as crystal. And back then you have no phones or nothing to take a picture with. But in that same canyon there, I remember seeing those tracks, and I'm thinking this was before all that happened. And I'm thinking that looks like if that's a bobcat, it's the biggest bobcat I've ever seen, with the foot that big on it. But I remember it was just about the size of my fist, that impression. There was like 2 or 3 impressions where it went across that little holler there. So, whether that's a breeding population of mountain lions or that's just an old wandering male that just lived in there for a while on his way to somewhere else, I don't know. But that was all in just a 4 or 5 year span there. So,
Man, I don't mess with mountain lions.
I love a good cat story like that. Love it. Love it.
I had a run in with one time in Colorado, a mountain lion. So,
Like
well,
close running,
elk
or
hunting. Well, to make a long story short, I was hunting up on a high mountain of evening where I'd heard some elk bugle, my recurve bow, and it started storming bad like it does up there. It come one of those lightning, sleet, spitting snowstorms, and bad lightning. I thought, well, I'm going to get off the top of this ridge. And we had a little spike camp way down in the bottom of the canyon down there, and I thought, well, I'm going to take a shortcut. I found a trail going over, if y'all ever been in Colorado, I presume, some of those high ridges like that up above timberline, right at timberline, there'd be some big rock outcroppings, and then there's just little pathways down through it you have to weave your way through. Well, I found one of them to get off of that high ridge and that lightning. Started in there, and I got just through some of those rocks to where it was still steep, but I was out of the rocks. They were right behind me. And all of a sudden, man, the hair stood up on the back of my neck, and I just had cold chills in my body. I thought, something's looking at me. I don't know if you've ever had that feeling out in the woods, but something is looking at me. And I stopped, and I looked around, had my little tiny recurve bow, felt like then. And I thought, well, that lightning's got me spooked. I took about 3 or 4 more steps, and then it hit me that time again bad. I thought, something is right here. Something's right here. I don't know what it is, but something's right here. It still gives me chills today. And I looked around again, and I thought, I just turned real slow and looked right back over my shoulder, and I'd just come through a crease in those rocks. There was a mountain lion laying there with his paws hanging over right on the edge of those rocks. I'd come right underneath him. I'd walked right underneath him there, and he was laying up there. All I could see was his paws and his head and his neck. And I bet he caught mule deer and stuff right there coming down through that gap in those rocks, and that's why I think he was laying there, because it was just a shelf on the side of that rock. I probably passed within 15 yards of him when I came down through there. I guess he didn't think I looked like a very good meal, I guess. But,
I was about to say, you're lucky you wasn't that hungry.
but and when I saw that, then what I do, and I thought, I'm just going to keep my eye on him and just start easing. I just kept easing down, and he never moved. He just laid there like that. I could see him. I was close enough. I was probably 30 yards of him then. You could see me blink his eyes a little bit. Now I went on down, and when I got where I get some trees between me and him, then I moved pretty fast after that.
That's what I'm getting on my. That's what.
But I know there's mountain lions up there.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting on my phone. I'm like, how much is that cougar tag again?
Oh no!
Oh man!
But I saw that. I thought I'd tell you that. Ben was talking about. You said you like cat stories.
Yeah.
That was the only time I've ever seen one up there. Like I said, I've spent a lot of time in Colorado. I used to do a lot of backpacking and fishing the high mountain streams and stuff for trout when I was younger. but I've bow hunted up there 5 different times, and that was on my. I guess that was the next to the last time I was up there is when that happened.
Have you ever had that same feeling, like you were talking about the chills you get when you thought there was something there? Have you ever had that feeling here in Arkansas?
Oh yeah,
Got a story with that? Or just a random feeling?
yeah. I mean, and usually it's turned out to be a bear.
You ever had any real sketchy encounters with bears around here?
You need to listen to a podcast.
Oh, okay.
I've told a big story about that. I had one charge me one time. And I fought it off with my recurve bow.
Oh, was that on Bear Grease?
It's on a Bear Grease render at the first Black Bear Bonanza. It's on the Bear Grease deals. I tell the whole story about it.
I'll link that in the show notes for everybody, and I'm going to listen to it as soon as we leave here.
You listen to it. Yeah, it was the first Black Bear Bonanza, and it was a Bear Grease render. I was on it. Clay was on it. Myron Means was on it. I tell that story about the bear charging me and stuff. Yeah. Long story short, she was biting the end of my bow. I walked up on, got too close to her and 2 small cubs, the little ones. You know, in the fall, you got the little ones and you got the year-old cubs. These were the little cubs, probably 25 pounds or so. Got too close, and she thought I was going to harm them, I guess, and she charged me, and I hollered at her and finished my bow. I wound up kicking her once in the face with my bottom of my boot. Just listen to the podcast.
Yeah.
Do you still have that bow here
Do I still have that bow?
that she bit? She said she bit the end of your bow.
Yeah.
You still
I
have
mean,
the bow?
it didn't hurt the bow. She was just snapping at it, but
Oh.
I still got the bow.
Oh my
That'd be
god.
cool. It had some teeth marks in it. But
Yeah, she didn't actually bite it. I didn't see no bite marks on it. But I mean, she was snapping at me too. When I kicked her, I just had a feeling that she was fixing to try to. She'd already swatted at me a couple of times, swung at me with her paw. And Myron Means, who was at the time the main bear biologist for Arkansas, he told me, he said, "You're lucky she didn't knock you down." He said, I said, "Well, I was moving when she was doing that." And I said, "They was right in front of me, but I was kind of fending her off the bow." And I said, then all of a sudden I could see her. She got lower to the ground like that and popping her teeth, biting at me. And I guess I don't remember it, but I mean, I remember it, but I don't know what made me do it. But I remember her kind of lunging at me, and I just reared back and just bam, just like that, kicked her right in the nose with my boot. And she backed up then, and she never got any closer after that. She still growled and woofed at me and snapped at me. But
Yeah, we don't have to deal with stuff like that in Alabama.
you
Well, it's
will
not
if the
yet.
bear population increases.
Yeah, it's
But I
getting
mean,
there.
and bears usually, you never see them because they usually leave out when, but this is one of them instances where the wind was right and I was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
mm-hmm.
I don't hold nothing against the bear. And she wasn't a big bear. She might have weighed 150, 60 pounds, but a 100-pound bear can tear you all to pieces, kill you in an instant. They're so strong. I'll say one thing.
Yeah.
Just to include it, being we're talking about bears.
Mhm.
A lot of the stuff we've talked about today, you can apply some of that same stuff to hunting bears in these mountains. As far as food sources, travel corridors, you don't have rubs or scrapes. If you can find scat, the big bear I've got up, full mount upstairs up here that was between 500 and 600 pounds, I killed it on public land with a muzzleloader. I found scat. I found a feeding area that was scat. I found the edge of a clear cut that had scat. I set up on the edge of the clear cut. About the 4th day, I sat there in a tree stand in the head of a little holler that went into this clear cut, like we was talking about. The bear come around above me, and I killed it with my muzzleloader.
We're going to try to do some more a couple bear episodes this summer, and I appreciate you saying that because we do get questions about that, especially guys out of Georgia. We got a lot of listeners, North Georgia, like try to hunt bears, in North Carolina too. So it's good to know a lot of stuff kind of still translates over. You're just trying to look for a little bit different some, but the same terrain features.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, Mo,
The later in the season you hunt them, the closer they're going to be to their den areas, even big males and stuff, you know. And so keep that in mind too, that they like certain denning areas. So you find scat and food source and everything, then concentrate on that and hunt, and you'll have pretty good success. And good success in bear hunting is seeing a bear once every 3 years. I've been blessed. I've been years I've seen 3 or 4 bears and passed them up, you know, hoping for a bigger bear now that I've killed several. But you have, like last year, I hunted hard for bears. and never saw one. I hunted a lot of days for bear last year. Never saw a bear. Found some really fresh sign. Smelt one a couple of times. I was close to them, but never saw one.
I do want it. What's a bear smell like? I mean, I killed
Like a
one.
bear.
Okay.
They just got their own smell, especially a boar.
Like upwind of you, you smelled something?
Yeah. And then I was slip hunting and smelled it. I thought, that's a bear. And I'd found some scat that looked like it was made the night or the day before, 200 yards before that. And then I smelt that. I thought, there's a bear here close, And then like in these mountains, the wind swirl a little bit, and I heard a and I didn't hear it run off or nothing, but I heard that, and then it was gone.
Yeah, I want to go bear
Like I said, most times, that's why a lot of people don't never see bears, because they've got such a good sense of smell that they usually go the other way when they sense you.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't want nothing to do with you.
Well, Mo, I'll say this. Appreciate you for letting us come to the house, sit down with you. I know we've been here for a long time, talking even before we started doing the podcast, but it's great to get a guy on like yourself that has not only the family history, but the personal experience hunting these mountains. Because, like you mentioned, mountains are tough. They're hard to hunt. That's one of the reasons why we've started dabbling in them a little bit more and trying to get more guys on that have that kind of experience level, because for you, it's pretty much all you know. But
Yeah, I mean, I'd be lost if I hunted the flatlands. I've never hunted them. The flattest lands I've hunted is turkey hunting a few places in Oklahoma, and that's and I wouldn't have a clue how to deer hunt any of them places. So
Exactly. And just a guy like yourself that's a woodsman. I mean, that's what it comes down to is woodsmanship, learning how to hunt, learning from past experiences and failures to, have repeatable success. And clearly you've got him here in the house. I'm sure we'll cut in some footage for some of the deer you've got here and the bear and everything else, or bears in this house. But just greatly appreciate you letting us come in and do this episode.
I had fun. I enjoyed doing this with you guys. So
Oh, perfect. Well, all the viewers and listeners out there, if you've enjoyed the podcast, leave us a review. Leave us a comment down below again, especially maybe you got a mountain lion story. I want to hear it. I want to read about it. But other than that, catch y'all back here on the next episode from the Southern Outdoorsman podcast. And remember, guys, y'all stay Southern.